Qualichem, supporting the water treatment community since 1990. At Qualichem, we say the blender matters. And here are some things that matter at Qualichem. An unparalleled support staff. We have 3 certified water technologists on staff to support your technical needs. This means you get the expertise you need from someone who has walked in your shoes. With one of the strongest support staffs in the industry, Qualichem offers support in technical, sales, application, and lab support. To find out more about Qualichem, go to scalinguph2o.com/Qualichem. Once again, that's scalinguph2o.com/Qualichem. At Qualichem, we know the blender matters. Collaborate and thrive. At the Rising Tide Mastermind, collaboration is key. Work alongside like-minded professionals who are eager to share insights and strategies. Together, we achieve more. Join us and experience the power of collaboration. To find out more about the Rising Tide Mastermind, go to scalinguph2o.com/mastermind. Once again, that's scalinguph2o.com/mastermind. Find out if the Rising Tide Mastermind is right for you. Welcome to the Scaling Up H2O podcast, the podcast where we scale up on knowledge so we don't scale up our systems. My name is Trace Blackmore, the host of the Scaling Up H2O podcast. And Nation, welcome to episode 408. It is just unreal that we have so many episodes behind us, but also that we have so many episodes in front of us. So in order to do that, as you know, I say it almost every episode, but I need to hear from you. So if you have a show idea, a guest that we need to interview, or a question about industrial water treatment, get all of that information to us by going to scalinguph2o.com, going over to our ideas section, and letting us know what that is. Now, it's because of people that have done that very thing, those very things, that we are able to have today's show. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, today is a Pinks and Blues episode. That means this is an episode that I am going to take questions from the audience and build an entire show around those questions to make your day-to-day a little bit better, maybe a little bit easier. But one more time, the only way that I can do something like this is for you to keep asking those questions. So before we get to those questions, I want to talk about a few of the upcoming events that are just around the corner. Now, just around the corner next week, if you are going to San Diego, California for the Association of Water Technologies technical training, folks, I will see you there because I will be there. I have the distinct privilege of being one of the trainers there. And if you're there, please come up and introduce yourself to me. If we've already met, please come up, say hi. I love it when I get to meet members of the Scaling Up Nation. And you can tell me what your idea is in person. I love that too. In fact, you've probably heard me interview people that I have met at these trainings. They came up with an idea, and I had them on the show. Walker Burnett of episode 398. That is exactly what happened at this very training seminar last year. And we, of course, had him on the show. It was a great show. Lots of great feedback from that. We got a lot of great information from that. And I think a lot of people in the Scaling Up Nation are doing things a little bit better on their new account startups because of that episode. That all started because we happened to be standing in line together waiting for lunch. So how cool is that? So don't keep those ideas to yourself. Let me know what they are. Let the team here at the Scaling Up H2O podcast know what they are, because that is how we make future shows. But all that to say, if you are going to be in San Diego, California, February 25th through 28th, you will see me there. And if you want information about the AWT technical training, there is still space for you to come next week. Go to scalinguph2o.com, go over to our events page, and we're going to have all of that information for you. Or maybe you're going to attend the second event for AWT, which is in Frisco, Texas. That's going to be March 26th through March 29th. And of course, we have the same situation there. I will be there. You will be there. Let's exchange some ideas. Let's shake hands and let's just have fun being in the same place together, talking about our favorite topic, industrial water treatment. Something else that's coming up April 6th through 12th in Washington, D.C. is the National Association of Clean Water Agencies Water Week. And this is all about innovation in water quality around regulations, changes, enforcement, watershed approaches, and all of the in-between. So if you want more information about this show, we're going to have all of that on our events page. And then one of the big shows out there, I know a lot of people that listen to this podcast attend. The Water Quality Association is having their convention and expo April 22nd through 24th in Long Beach, California. We, of course, are going to have all of that information for you by going to scalinguph2o.com and going over to our events page. Nation, if you know of an event that is not listed on our events page, let us know by going to our ideas page, just like you would let us know about a show idea of what the conference is, what the event is. We are trying to make our events page a one-stop source for you to just go there and know everything that's going on in the industrial water treatment industry. So many people have come up and said that they attended a show they didn't even know existed because they went to that page, they heard it on this podcast, and they learned something new. They met some new people. And folks, when you start doing something more than just your day-to-day, like going to some of the events we mention on each episode, you are making a change in your day-to-day. You're making a change in your career, and things get better. Things become more fun, and you get to meet new people. And I think that's one of the things that makes this industry so much fun, is because we get to meet new people, and people in this industry are just so open-handed about knowledge that they painstakingly had to experience mistakes in order to understand. We'll just give that information to you if you know who to ask. And the only way you can do that is to meet people and talk to people, and also be willing to give that same information back when people need something from you. Now, somebody that fits this model perfectly is our friend James McDonald, and here is a brand new What Do You Know?
Hello and welcome to What Do You Know? The game show where we find out what do you know about industrial water treatment, drop by drop. So pump up your brain, take out that test kit of knowledge, and prepare to answer this week's question on What Do You Know? Today's question is, at atmospheric pressure, a pound or kilogram of water that is converted to steam will expand by approximately how many times? $1,600 times. That is quite the explosive expansion. I'm James McDonald, and thanks for playing along with us. Stay tuned for next week's episode of What Do You Know?
Well, thank you, James. And as I mentioned at the very beginning of this show, this is a Pinks and Blues episode, which means I have taken several questions and comments from you, the Scaling Up Nation, and turned them into an entire show. Now, specifically, these were questions around episode 397. Now, if you remember, episode 397 is where I was taking you through how I not only run tests, but how I look at my tests. And so many people commented that they never thought about categorizing the tests in the way that I did in 397. So if you have no idea what I'm talking about, go back, listen to 397. Now, I don't think you need to listen to it prior to this episode, but just realize that's where most of the questions that created what I'm going to talk about for this episode came from. And specifically, it's around processes. And Nation, I'm going to admit it. I love processes. I absolutely love processes. When I was 14, I got a job at McDonald's. And on my very first day, we had a break room / training room, and there was a television there with a bunch of VHS tapes, hundreds of them. And my job was to take one of the VHS tapes. Of course, it was labeled, and I had to watch it. I had to take a test on it, and I had to demonstrate what I learned to my manager. And there were tapes and processes on everything. So I started out on the grill. And if I was cooking hamburger patties, there was a specific pattern of patty placement that I had to place the hamburger patties depending on how many I were cooking. If I was cooking 4, they went in a certain arrangement. If I was cooking 9, they went into a certain arrangement. 7, they went into a certain arrangement. And all this was done to maximize where the heat on the grill was, to maximize how close you were to the spatula, to the grill. It was all about efficiency and consistency. And folks, I was 14 and I loved it. I love the fact that somebody put this much thought into something as simple as patty placement. Now, I can see other people can say, don't you tell me where to put the patties. I can put them wherever I need to. Well, yes, you could, but you're not going to get the consistency. That's why you can buy a Big Mac here in Atlanta, Georgia, and also one in Paris, France, and it tastes exactly the same. It's all about their consistency. It's all about their procedures. Now, there was even a procedure on how to mop. It started with gathering all the equipment that you needed in order to mop, the mop bucket, the mop, making sure everything was clean, how to prepare the mop solution, and then how to use the mop during cleaning. And there is a figure 8 method that you use that allows the mop to do the work for you, and you don't have to break your back. So maximum cleaning with the least amount of effort. That was all in a procedure. And I also believe when you make something fun, other people can enjoy it. And how they made it fun, at least it made it fun for me, is at the time, McDonald's was very different. I wore a tie back then. There was a big full-length mirror that before you walked out where anybody could see you, you were required to check yourself out in the mirror. And they had a picture of a model employee, a male employee, and then a female employee, and you had to match that picture. If something was out of place, out of a line, you were supposed to fix it right there before you walked out in sight of anybody that could see you. I don't know if they're doing that anymore, but they definitely did it when I was working. And if you could see the tie I was wearing, I had, by the time I left McDonald's, about 40 pins on my tie. That was a 500-pound tie that I would wear, but I wore it proudly because each one of those pins demonstrated that I passed so many of those procedural tests to reach some sort of milestone that allowed me to get gifted this pin and display it that I had expertise in cleaning or whatever it was. that might seem goofy to you, but 14-year-old Trace absolutely loved that. And I was so proud of those pins. So, quite frankly, I have a love for procedures. There, I admitted it. You now know some of the past. But because of my love of procedures, I've not only been able to create things, I've been able to enlist the help of others, and we can all help each other on the same page while we're not getting in each other's way, while we're each working on something different, but we know where each other is and we know what the next steps are and we know how to help each other. All of that is because we have processes and procedures. Now, I love the quote, what gets measured gets improved. But how do you know what to improve? I think everybody would agree what gets measured gets better. And by the way, we should measure pretty much everything that we do in some way or another. And a simplistic measure is better than no measure at all. But when we're measuring something and there's a problem, how do we know how to improve it? Or the better question is, how do we know what it is we need to improve? If we do things with procedures, we know how we're doing things. And we also know when a certain part of that procedure is not working, we now know which part we need to fix. Without that, we have no idea. And a lot of times we don't even know that it wasn't working. And we continue to work it broken. Folks, that's not a fun thing. You're not going to get any pins for your tie for that. So today, we're going to talk about processes and procedures. And this is all about questions that you all sent in to me about episode 397, about how I came up with certain things. How did I decide that I was going to run this before that? What was the mindset? How did I come up with all of that? Well, folks, I put all those questions together into this one procedural episode, and that's what we are going to talk about. Now, as we get into this topic, I know there's somebody out there that's listening and thinking, I work alone. I'm not in charge of anybody. I'm not supervising anybody. It's just me out here. So why do I need processes or procedures? And that's a great question. Again, I'm going to take you back to episode 397, where I talked all about the test in my test kit. I mentioned that I had a unique way of looking at my test, that I had a procedure for how to run all of my tests, but also I had in that procedure when to run them and why to run them. I got all the things that were in my head out and written down. So that way, if I ever did have somebody that I was going to supervise or train, I have a complete training manual for them. So there you go. There's a great reason there. Or maybe it's a more selfish reason. Okay, I'm never going to be in charge of anybody. Why should I have processes and procedures? Well, just like buying a Big Mac in Atlanta or Paris, consistency. And folks, when you do things consistently, you can change things and you can run metrics and you can see if that change was worthwhile, if that change actually gave you something. In episode 397, I mentioned just a little tweak saved you 5 minutes every time you were at this particular account or running this particular test. Well, how many times did you run that? We multiply that by 20 during a week. Folks, that is real time. And when we know what we're doing and we're doing it consistently, we can make little tiny changes like that that can have huge benefits on the back end. Now, one of the procedures that I shared with you in 397 is I always run my longest test first. so they can start to cook. Yeah, that's what I say. So, except for conductivity. Now, my longest test is silica. Silica takes what, 13, 14 minutes? Conductivity takes a couple of seconds. Conductivity tells me an overall view of what's going on in that system. So let's say I'm at a cooling tower system. I'm getting ready to run all of my tests, but before I do, and I've already looked at the system, I've walked around, I've made my hypothesis of what I think is going on, and everything seems status quo. So I'm going to run my regular procedure with my regular test in the regular way that I normally run them. And right before I start my longest test, I'm going to take a conductivity of that water sample. Now, let's say it's extremely low, like the same value as makeup water. Well, folks, I'm not going to spend a lot of time running my tests. I need to find the leak. On the other side, maybe it's extremely high. Well, I'm not going to spend a lot of time running my test again. I need to figure out why that system isn't bleeding or what else is going on. Now, maybe I have to run a couple of tests to figure out what that is, but now I'm keyed in on my shortest test telling me an overview of what's going on in the system, instead of just blindly doing the same thing all the time. So that's all written into my procedure. And that's a procedure. That doesn't sound very difficult, but if you do that consistently, that is a procedure. It doesn't have to be lengthy, but it does need to make sense. Now, as we get into this, I know semantics, and I tend to use the words processes and procedures interchangeably. And I will tell you, if we were to look up the definition, they are not interchangeable. So I'm just going to apologize in advance. I'm going to mix those up, but I am going to read to you what the differences are. So a process is a series of interconnected steps or activities designed to achieve a specific outcome. It provides a high-level overview of what needs to be done, and it typically includes a start point, an end point, a sequence of steps, inputs and outputs, maybe even examples of each one of those. Now, a procedure, on the other hand, is a detailed set of instructions on how to perform a specific task within a process, and it provides the how-to for each step. And it includes detailed instructions, step-by-step guidance on how to complete the particular task, specific roles and responsibility, who's responsible for each task, tools and resources. So this might be where we go to our test kit manufacturer and we actually import some of the actual testing procedures that they have. So processes are broader and encompass multiple steps, where procedures are narrower and focus on an individual task. Okay, so those are the differences. And now that we know that, I promise you, I'm going to mix all of those up. I'm going to use them interchangeably. So you're just going to have to deal through this episode. But the bottom line is you need a standard way of how you are going to do something so you know what you are doing is either working or it's not working. Now, I have a goal to have a process for everything that we do here. And that might be in our water lab. Obviously, we need to be consistent with that. We don't need people figuring out their own way to run and report different analysis when we bring samples in. No, we need consistency there. And the only way to do that is to make sure that we have processes and procedures. We have processes and procedures for this podcast. And folks, there are so many steps in putting on the Scaling Up H2O podcast, making sure that not only we have an episode that you all want to listen to each and every week, but all the things that go on in the background to make sure we can get that far. There is a process and procedure for all of those various things. And what that does, it not only allows for consistency, it allows us to know that something is either working or it's not working. Because if we didn't know what the process was to reach the outcome, we would have no idea if we were achieving that. Now, I want you to think about all the things that you do, or maybe people that you supervise, all the things that they do. How would you actually know if there was an issue? How would you know if somebody was taking longer to do something just because they didn't know the proper way to do it? And it was costing them valuable time over their entire week, over their entire month, over their entire year. And that was taking time away from them talking to the customer, from them finding new customers, from them spending time with their family. In Atlanta, 5 minutes can mean you're going to spend an extra hour in traffic. So if we can get those 5 minutes to get you in the car, you're going to get back to the office or your family an hour earlier because we are doing things correctly and efficiently. And the only way we can do that is if we have processes that we can monitor. So imagine a company that didn't have any standard ways of doing anything. It was the Wild West, and everybody had their own style of doing every single thing that they would do. As you can imagine, there's absolutely no consistency with that. So some members might write awesome service reports where others would write horrible service reports. How would we know? I don't know. There's no standard. So what's to say what a good report is and what a bad report is? Maybe there's some team members that do 10 tests on a cooling tower on a regular battery of tests, and others that just do 2. Well, who's right and who's wrong? What are they using the 10 test for? How can they only use 2 tests? Is that enough? Again, if we haven't created a standard, we can't answer that question. Not to mention, we can't collaborate with each other because now we're doing everything in a different way. Now, imagine you had different control ranges for the same products that you were using. How are you ever going to dose the product properly? And what if somebody goes on vacation and now you're taking over somebody's account for that month? How are you ever going to make sure that you're leaving that account at the best it could possibly be? We don't know the best way of doing things because there's no consistent way of doing things. We don't know if things are being done right or if they're not being done right. No one knows because there's no standard of doing something. I guess no standard in this case is the standard. So we have no idea if something is wrong. And if we don't know if something's wrong, we're never going to know to fix it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about a very simple process for creating a process. So I want you to just think of something that you do every day as we go through this and how you would create a process for it. And after you create that process, you now know if there's an issue or not, if there's something wrong with the process. Now, here is the power of having a process. And if you are in charge of somebody else, folks, I don't know how to do that without a process because now it becomes personal and not procedural. And I think that is the key, that when we lead people, we need to make sure that we have some sort of procedure that we are using to help us lead those people and not do it differently based on the people that we are leading. Now, I'm not saying you don't lead people differently because everybody is a little bit different. And I say lead and not manage on purpose because lead is a quality that allows people to want to follow you. Manage is something you do to things. But with that, this is how we use processes here in this company. First thing we do is we make sure that we have a process. And then whoever's creating the process, we go through start and finish, make sure that it makes sense. We then tap somebody in to see if we forgot anything and even run the process. And then we have a standardized form that we do our processes with. So everything looks alike. And then we train people on that process. So let's say all of that was done. And now we are confronted with some sort of issue. Something happened to give us a different outcome than what we were expecting. That is an issue. Well, if we have an issue, number one, we always blame the process. We want it to be the process's fault because that's the easiest thing to fix. So when in doubt, we always blame the process. And the first thing we do is we ask ourselves, okay, this is the issue. Was there a process? And if the answer is no, that was the issue. We then write a process. If the answer was yes, we move to the next question. And then that question is, was the process correct? And if the answer is yes, we move on to the next question. If it's no, we correct the process, we retrain it, we rework it to make sure that that issue doesn't re-arise, and then we're good to go. But if the process was correct, we then say, did the person use the process? And if the answer is yes, typically there is a training issue with that. Or maybe the person answered no, and then we need to retrain why it's important to use the process so we know what to fix, so we don't have errors like what just occurred. And we just solve the problem. Now, we blame the process at least 3 times in that example. And it's not until we figure out that the process is good, the training around the process was good, that we now have an individual issue, a person issue. And the reason I mention that is because 9 times out of 10, we blame the person first. And that is not always productive, especially if the person didn't know that they did something incorrectly. They're probably not going to know how to fix it in the future. So even if they were reprimanded, even if they were written up, they don't have a way to consistently fix it. So we do all these things to blame the process, not an issue with the process we just proved. Now we're going to work with this person. And the person, we need to figure out why they didn't do something that they needed to do. And typically it is a training issue. A lot of times people will become complacent because they've done something so many times. Maybe they've taken a couple of shortcuts, and those shortcuts have now become their own personal procedure. And because they weren't following the procedure when something else happened, it allowed this issue to take place. So that's why it's so important to always follow the procedure each and every time, because now we're consistent. Now we're not going to have to guess where the issues are. So here's what we do when we coach the person with the process. We ask, does that person understand the process? Does that person want to do the process? And then finally, does that person have the capacity to do that process? Now, if any one of those answers is no, you've got to ask yourself, is there any way to change that into a yes? And if that is a yes, then that's how you're going to coach that person. However, if those are consistently going to be a no, well, that person can't do that job anymore. And you now have to figure out, is there a new role for that person? Can they just not do this procedure? Or is it an entire thing within their role that they're not able to do? Folks, that's not a bad thing because they know it as well. And if you have a job that they can answer yes to in your company, you're going to be happier. They're going to be happier. But let's just assume for this example, all of that is yes. So now we need to retrain. We need to retrain based on, do they understand the process? We need to confirm that they want to do the process, and we need to confirm that they have the capacity to do it. Now, we might have them actually run the process while they're reading it, while we're able to be there and acknowledge and watch and answer questions. And then just ensure that, hey, for the next couple times that you do this, make sure you have this in front of you. And by the way, you might be thinking that processes are 80-page documents. First off, they are not. Bullet points are some of the best processes out there because people will actually use them. So, as simplistic as you can make them without not forgetting the stupid stuff. Let me say that again because I don't think that was proper English. You don't want people to make mistakes because they forgot to do something that was so simple, stupid. And that's a lot of times what the processes allow us to do. They allow us to just run through 1 through 10 or however many steps it is. And we're not going to forget the things that make the Big Mac the same here in Atlanta or Paris, France. So think about processes that way. And it's my hope that I've sold you on how important it is to have processes. So how do you actually make a process? So here's what I like to do. When I come into a job, I'm thinking about what are all the core processes that are needed in order for everything to work together for us to have the desired outcome that we need. And there's probably going to be multiple core processes, and I just make a list. Folks, this might be an intimidating list that you make, but here is the win. So now you have a list of all your core processes, and now you're going to prioritize them. Which is the most important that I need to make sure that I work on? Because everything else lies on that. Maybe there's a foundational process. So whatever that is, that's the process that you're going to pick off of that list, and we're going to take through the rest of this process. Now, we're going to develop this process, and the first thing you're going to do is exactly that. What's the first thing you need to do? What is number one? What is the first task? What is the second task? What is the third task? And so on. In my example on episode 397, I start my longest test first, which is silica. However, that's right after I do my conductivity of the system. Because that couple of second tests that I do on conductivity can save me an hour's worth of running all these tests, where a lot of times I could have just gotten the information that I needed from my 2-second conductivity test. So that is step 1 on this particular procedure. I also put all of my tools, all of my files, all of my procedures on how to run tests all in one place so I never have to look for them. All that stuff is all in one place, and I can't tell you how much time I have wasted over my lifetime because I was looking for something. So if I don't have to look for something and I have a question, now all of that's not listed out. Like I don't have a procedure on how to run the silica test within my procedure, but I have a link to go to that if I need it. So you see, it's a little more simplistic than maybe you were thinking the procedure needs to be. It's there if you need it, but I definitely don't have to look for it. So let's actually talk about documenting the process. So I've got everything collected. And I want to say there is some software out there that is pretty sexy when it comes to writing procedures. However, I can tell you that I have paralyzed myself with analyzing which is the right software platform to use, and I never got the actual job I set out to do done because of all the shiny squirrel stuff that was out there. So know thyself, if that is you, like it's me, you might be better off doing something on a Microsoft Word document or Excel, or maybe even a legal pad at first. So don't get distracted with bells and whistles. That can come later. The goal is here just to get it documented. Now, I will say having it on some sort of an electronic form is to your benefit because of what I was just talking about before. All of those test procedures I have hyperlinked within my procedure. So my procedure is as streamlined as possible. And if I need to click deeper into that, all of that is hyperlinked there. Maybe I need to go into a particular system. Maybe it's our reporting system, and I have a link directly to that. I try to put all of those things in there so it forces me and everybody else to want to work that procedure because it's my one-stop place where everything resides, and I don't have to go here and there and everywhere to try to find something. That's a good procedure. That's how to set that up. And that's how it saves us time. We don't have to go looking for something. So we have everything written down in whatever form that it is. And then I love using AI for this. Once I get it to this point, I will then use my favorite AI of the day, whatever that is. There's so many out there. Pick one and give it some parameters. Tell it that you're writing a procedure. You want it easy to read, easy to reference. You want it visually pleasing. Anything you want to put in there, correct of grammar. You want a particular tone. You can say all of that stuff and it will actually rewrite it for you. Now, AI will put stuff there that sounds so right and it is so wrong, but it says it so confidently. So don't take whatever it says that it is correct. Make sure you're always defaulting back to your original procedure. And maybe what it created for you was worse than what you had to begin with. But now at least you have a different version. And a lot of times what I do is I pick and choose from my version and their version. And normally I get a pretty good document that way. Then I give it to somebody else to see if it makes sense, and I will ask them to actually run the process through. Not that they know how to do it. Normally, I do want somebody that knows how to do it, but I don't want them to do it from their memory. I want them to only use the document and make notes if there is anything missing or wrong or anything in between. And then it will come back to me. I will then take those notes. We'll then have a pretty good procedure. And then we're going to implement the process, which means we're going to train ourselves and the team that we're not going to do it from our memory anymore. We are going to do it from this process because maybe that person and myself, we miss something. And folks, we have had happen multiple times where we have written a process. We've done everything that I've told you up to this point, and that process just sits in a file somewhere. Nobody's using it. And then a new person joins the team. We say, we've got a process for this. Go learn the process. We assume the process is correct. And then we see how they're doing the process. And we'll say, why are you doing it like that? And they said, well, that's the way the process told me to do it. And we look at the process and the process was wrong because we didn't test it, because we didn't force ourselves to use it. We did not have a real process. So have the discipline to only use that process because then that allows you to improve it. And you are constantly using this process and constantly reviewing it and improving it. There is nothing wrong with improving the process. Perhaps somebody made a mistake and it was a happy tree. It was a happy mistake. And you're like, oh my gosh, we were doing 7 steps and we really only need to do 3. I had no idea. Well, that's a great thing. We can update the process. Maybe there's a new testing medium out there that we didn't have access to before. And now, because we do, we need to update the process. Now, what I would recommend is that you keep all of your processes electronically and you have version numbers. So that way you can control them when you print them out and make books and things like that. Unless you're taking up the books and redistributing them, take it from me because I've had it happen. We will have multiple versions of processes out there, but now everybody has a phone, everybody has handhelds, everybody has laptops. Everybody has a way to get electronic data, so it's very easy to control the latest, greatest version of your reviewed and improved procedure. And as you can imagine, we have tons of processes for this very thing that I am doing right now, this podcast. Before I started recording this podcast, there was about a dozen things that I had to get ready, that I had to do to make sure that I could do what I am doing right now. Now, when I first started, I had no idea what those things are. Now I don't have to think about those things. As we discovered them, as we improved them, they became a process, and I just check all the way through that. And folks, it makes it more efficient. It makes it more consistent. And I will tell you, it makes it more fun. Now, maybe I need to make a pin for my tie that I did these processes, and maybe an exam that I can pass so I can get that pin. And no, I'm not wearing a tie right now, and I'm probably not going to make a pin for the process. However, I do have my scaling up button. So maybe I'll give myself an extra scaling up button that I did all of the pre-recording procedures. But Nation, because I have all that, I was just able to do all those things and immediately come on this podcast to get this information to you. And that is more fun. When I'm efficient, I'm having fun. And when I'm talking about process and procedures, I'm also having fun. I hope you enjoyed this episode, as you might have heard your question in here in one way or another. I would not have been able to do an episode like this, because I wouldn't have even gotten the idea to do an episode like this if I didn't get some questions from episode 397. Now, of course, I'm picking on episode 397. So if you haven't heard that in a while, please go listen to that. And one of the things that we started doing on episode 397 is we did a discussion guide. And we're trying to do more and more discussion guides with each and every episode. And there's going to be a discussion guide for this episode. And you might be asking yourself, Trace, what is a discussion guide? Well, as I mentioned, when I go to different events and I talk with members of the Scaling Up Nation, I ask people what they want to hear on the podcast, but also what we could do to help improve their experience on this podcast. And several people have told me that they love assigning certain episodes to their team members, and then they use that episode to discuss with the team how they learned something or how they make something they're doing better. And if we could help guide that conversation, that would be helpful to them. So that's why we created these discussion guides. So if you are somebody that is leading this discussion, you can download these free guides, and it normally has a brief synopsis of the show. And then it has 10 sample questions. Now you can make your own questions up, but it's got 10 questions that you can use. And then you can just hand that sheet out to your team. And the second sheet is your cheat sheet. It's got our ways to answer those questions. Of course, there's multiple ways you can answer the questions. The whole point is not that there's one right, correct answer. The whole point is to discuss with your team so everybody's learning. Well, we get you started with that with the discussion guide. So all you have to do to get that discussion guide is go to scalinguph2o.com. And on this episode, there'll be a pop-up and you can just download the discussion guide. And we have those discussion guides on multiple episodes. So check it out. Maybe that's something you can start doing with your team. And maybe you will start writing some processes with your team. Trust me, when your whole team gets involved, everybody gets to weigh in, which means everybody gets buy-in. And folks, when you have processes for things, things get better. Things get more fun. you get less problems, and then you almost celebrate problems. No, it's not almost. You do celebrate problems because now you know what to fix, and you know without a doubt you improved it at the end of the day. So, nation, without processes, you are just living in anarchy, and nobody wants that. Well, Scaling Up Nation, just one more time, I want to thank everybody who wrote in with a question or a comment that gave me the idea for this show. Again, if you have questions, comments, potential guests, or anything you want to let us know, go to scalinguph2o.com, go over to our ideas section, and you can let us know whatever your heart desires. And my heart, of course, is very thankful for that. Nation, I am thankful that you are part of the Scaling Up Nation, and we are going to have a brand new episode for you next Friday. In the meantime, try to document a procedure and start getting better one item at a time. Have a great week, folks. Want to ensure you're fully prepared for the Certified Water Technologist examination? Our CWT prep course provides you with the tools and knowledge you need. From detailed study guides to a 100-question practice exam, we've got you covered. Visit scalinguph2o.com/CWT prep and start your journey to certification.